Hey guys, I decided to make the Wispy smoke tutorial. So the effect that we're going to be creating here is a wispy type of smoke. And this is the type of smoke that you would see coming from the end of a lit cigarette or a pipe or something of that nature. This really isn't the kind of smoke that you would want to use for an explosion or some type of thick billowing smoke. This is going to be more of a soft, wispy type of smoke. So to get started, we need to create an object that's going to be used for the emitter. So in this case, I'm going to use a sphere. And I'm going to make it editable. And we'll go over into point mode because we're going to need to select some points in order to use for the point emitter. Now, years ago, back around the days of R8 and R9, Maxon had a point emitter preset in the content browser. And what that point emitter allowed you to do was select certain points of an object, or all the points if you wanted to, and you could use those points to emit particles. Now, with the release of R10, Maxon got rid of the point emitter and replaced it with the surface emitter. Fortunately for us, the surface emitter has different functions, and one of those functions is point mode. So we need to go to the content browser, and we need to go to our emitter list, and we need to go down to surface emitter and double click that, and that will add one to our scene. So here are the attributes for the surface emitter, and the first thing I want to do is grab the sphere and drop that down into the polygon surface. And then for the source, we want to change that from polygon to point. If we leave it at polygon, what's going to happen is that this emitter is going to start emitting particles from the very center of each polygon of the sphere. And I would rather use points in this case. So we're going to change that to point. And I'm going to change the type here from rate to count. And I'm going to take the particle number up considerably. So I'm going to take it up to maybe 1,000. And if we hit play, okay, there's our particles being emitted from the sphere from all the points, but that's way too many right now, and I only want to select a few points to use for this. So we're going to go into point mode, select the sphere. I'm going to grab my live selection tool, and I'm going to go to the bottom here, and I'm just going to select perhaps maybe 5 or 6 points. So I'm going to select that one, and maybe 2 on each side. Okay, so something like that. I think that will look pretty good. And now we want to make a set selection. So we're going to use the set selection command. That's going to give us a point selection tag. And if you don't have yours docked like I do, you can get to it by going to selection, set selection. Okay, so we have our point selection tag. So now what we need to do is go back to the emitter and drag that selection tag down to the selection link box. And now we can get out of point mode, and we can go back and hit play, and now you can see only particles are being emitted from that set selection of points. So I'm going to extend my timeline to about 300 frames. That way it'll give me a little more time to watch the playback, because 90 frames is a little too short. Okay, one more thing I also want to do before we go any further is to go back to the surface emitter, and I want to take the speed value here from 200 down to 0. And when we do that, if you hit play, let's go back to get rid of those stray particles. We'll hit play, and you can see that it doesn't look like it's emitting anything, but trust me, it is. There's just no speed to these particles, but it is still emitting. And to prove this to you, if you hit play and we take the object that's being the emitter, in this case a sphere, and drag it around, if we hit play and then move the sphere, you can see that it is emitting particles. There's just no speed to any of them. Okay, so we need to hide the sphere from being seen from the viewport and the render. And what we want to do now is set up a visible light, because the whole point behind this is using visible lights to fake the smoke. Now you could use pyrocluster if you wanted to. That's definitely another option, but it's going to take a little more time and effort to make pyrocluster look right in order to mimic the same effect that we're going to be getting from the lights. Also, the visible lights are going to render a whole lot faster than pyrocluster. So we need to create a OmniLight. And in the General tab, I'm just going to make this a little bit of a light gray color, so maybe something like that. And for the visible light, we'll turn that to visible. I'm going to enable no illumination and deselect diffuse and specular. So if we hit render, there is our visible light, but that is way too big. So we need to go over to the visibility tab, and the inner distance I'm going to take to a value of 5, and for the outer distance I'm going to take to a value of maybe 120. Okay, so that looks better, but it's still too bright. So there is a brightness setting here as well, and I'm going to take that down to roughly maybe something like 6. And we'll render that out again, and it's barely there. I don't know if you'll be able to see it or not, but it is there, and that's actually the result that I want, because the more of these particles that are going to be grouped together, the brighter it's going to be. So we want to make sure that this brightness setting is down low. Okay, so now what we want to do is place this light on each particle that is being emitted. And in order to do that, we have to use particle geometry. Now, anytime you want to place a shader like pyrocluster or anything like that, or any type of geometry, or in this case a light on top of your particles, you have to use particle geometry. That's Cinema 4D's way of applying some type of shading or geometry to a particle. So if you're using R12, you need to go up to the simulation or the simulation drop-down menu at the top. But in my case, I'm using 11.5. So we're going to go to Objects, Thinking Particles, Particle Geometry. And we need to go back to the surface emitter, and we need to take our light and drag that down into the shape link box. And then we can make our light a child of the particle geometry. And we can hit play now, and you can see some have popped up. So we just need to move the position here of the sphere, and now if we render, now we're beginning to get this really cool looking smoke trail. Alright, so that's how you do the smoke as far as setting up the emitter and everything like that, but in this case we want to make wispy smoke. So what we need to do is jump into some thinking particles and a little espresso in order to get these particles to start moving in a fashion that looks like smoke. So what we need to do is go over here and double click on the espresso tag, and I'm going to go down here to a corner where I can have some room, and we want to start introducing some thinking particle nodes into here. But before we do, anytime you want to introduce some type of dynamic thinking particle setup, you have to pass your particles through a p-pass node before you can pass them along to the thinking particle nodes. So we need to go create a new node, thinking particles, TP initiator, p-pass. And now we can create some thinking particle nodes. So for right now, I want to create a dynamic node. It's going to be the P wind. And we're going to be using wind to fake this smoke. So I'm going to create one, and then I'm going to control click and drag down to duplicate it. And you'll notice that inside of these wind nodes, it says none. And the reason for this is because it's expecting us to have some type of object in our object manager or in our scene that's going to be acting as the wind. So what we need to do is go back to the viewport, and we need to make a null object, and I'm going to control click and drag down to duplicate it. I'm going to name the first one small turbulence and the second one large turbulence. Okay, so we'll go back to the espresso, and for the first P wind node, that's going to be the large turbulence. So I'm going to take that large turbulence null and drag that into this first wind null, or this node. Then I'm going to take the small null and drag that into the second P wind node. Okay, so we can hook these up now. And I'll go back to the view, and I'm going to take this large null, and I'm going to position that down here, and then I'm going to take the small one and position that one up here. Now you notice that these nulls have now become square splines with an arrow that's pointing in the direction that the wind is going to be blowing. Now in this case, I don't want the wind to be blowing in the Z direction. I want it to be blowing up. So what we got to do is select both of these nulls and go into the coordinates, and I'm just going to pitch both of these up plus 90 degrees. Now that way the wind will be blowing upward. So we'll go back to Espresso, and we're going to click on this first large wind node, and I want to take the strength of this up to 1,000. And then I also want to come down here to the turbulence, and I want to take that up to 1,000 as well. And for the structure size, I'm going to take that to 1,000. And for the frequency, I'll take to maybe a value of 0.5. So we'll go back, and I'm going to hit play, and let's see what happens here. Okay, so now we're starting to get our upward smoke, but it's going way too fast, and there's just not enough to it. So what we need to do is introduce some more thinking particle nodes into the scene. So the first one I want to use is P friction to slow this stuff down. So let's go to the thinking particle nodes, and I want the P dynamic, P friction. So we'll connect that one up. And the friction I'm going to take to 2, and the spin friction I'm going to take to a value of maybe 0.25. So we'll go back, try it again. Okay, so it did slow down a little bit. So we'll go back, and I also want to introduce a P scale node. So we need to go to the thinking particles, TP standard, P scale, and we'll connect that one up. And for the variation, I'm going to change to about 15%, and the Y scale I'm going to take up to 120. And I'm going to activate this overage feature, and then I'm going to play around a little bit with the slider. So this white slider over here, I'm going to pull that back, and for this slider on the left, I'm going to make that a light shade of gray. Okay, so let's go back to the wind nodes. The first one here, that looks pretty good. Let's go to the small turbulent wind node. For the strength, I'm going to set that to 0. The decay, I'm going to set to 50. The turbulence, I'm going to take to 1,000. And the frequency we'll take to 0.5. Let's go back to the first one, which was the large null here, or the large turbulent null. And the decay, I'm going to take up maybe to a value of maybe something like 15 maybe. So we'll go back to the view again, and let's try this out and see what happens. Okay, so now we're starting to get a really nice wispy type of smoke here. You can see it's beginning to look more like smoke rather than just a straight up and down line. And that actually looks pretty good. So the only thing I think I'd like to do here is go over to the surface emitter and change the particle count and take it up maybe another 1,000 to a value of 2,000. And that actually looks pretty good. Okay, so here is our little wispy smoke type of effect, which looks pretty good to me. So now what we want to do, since we've got all of this set up, is we want to create an area in which these particles can stay active, and if they go outside of that area, then those particles will be killed off. That way we don't have any unnecessary calculation that has to happen in the viewport, because if your camera is mainly going to be focused on an area, say within this area here, and you've got a bunch of stray particles that are way up here that the camera is never going to see, then that's just going to create a lot of unwanted calculation for your viewport, and it's only going to slow things down. So if any of you have ever used RealFlow has a daemon called the volume daemon. And what this does is it allows you to kill off any stray particles that may go outside of the area that the volume daemon takes up. And you can also invert it that way. Any particles that come inside will be killed off. But in this case, we want to keep everything within the zone active, and anything that goes outside of its radius will be killed off. So a good thing to use for something like this would be a simple sphere. So I'm going to take the sphere and I'm going to take the radius up to maybe 3000. And of course we want to hide this from the viewport and the render as well. Okay, so now we want to give the sphere an espresso tag because we're going to need to do some espresso as well as thinking particle work here in order to tell thinking particles to kill these particles off if they go beyond the radius of the sphere. So I'm going to call this sphere kill zone, might as well, and we'll right click on it and go to espresso, and we want to take that kill zone sphere and bring it in. And we want to enable 2 output ports. So the first one is going to be coordinates global position, and the second one is going to be the radius, because we're going to have to use the radius of the sphere to determine when these particles are going to be killed off. So we need to go to Object Properties, Radius. Okay, so since we're dealing with thinking particles again and we're trying to control them, we're going to have to introduce another PPass node. So we need to go to Thinking Particles Initiator PPass. And what we want to do now is we want to get a pGetData node. And the reason for this is because it has the ability to get position information from each particle. So what we want to do is go back and get a thinking particle helper pGetData. And we need to expand it because we need to enable the output port for position. Okay, now we're also going to get the pDie node. So we'll go to New Node, Thinking Particles, and we want to go to TP Standard pDie. We'll drag this over here to the right, and we need to expand it also because we need to enable the input port for on. Okay, so let's connect a couple of these up. So we'll go from the PPass to the particle, and then we'll take the PPass over to the particle on the pDie node. Okay, so now we need to calculate the distance. And we need to use a distance node, and we're also going to need to use the compare node, which is a logic node, and that's going to tell the particles to be killed off if they go beyond the radius, because the compare node has the function greater than. So let's first create a espresso calculate distance, and then we want to go get another node which is going to be logic compare. Okay, so let's connect the position to the first input of the distance, and then the global position of the kill zone sphere to the second input. Then we're going to connect the distance output to the first input of the compare, and then the radius from the kill zone over to the second input, and then output that over to the on for the pDie node. So basically what we've done here is we've taken the position data and we're calculating its distance by the global position of the kill zone sphere, and then we're outputting that distance and we're comparing it to the radius of the kill zone sphere, and then we need to set the function of the compare node to greater than, and if it is greater than, if this distance is greater than the radius, because the compare node compares input 1 to input 2. So in this case, if the information coming into input 1 is greater than the radius of input 2, then this will output a value of 1, which will be greater than, and it will turn the pDie node on. And it will only kill the particles if they go beyond the radius of the sphere. So let's go back to the view, and if I hit play now, those particles should start to die off once they reach the top of the sphere. And there they go. You can see that they are dying off, that they're not going any higher than what you see right there. Alright, so there is the Wispy Smoke tutorial. And of course, if you want to change this, perhaps you don't want your smoke to go that high, all you have to do is click on your kill zone sphere and just change the radius. That's basically all there is to it. And just to show you, you can take this value down to something like 2000. And then go back and play again, and now those particles will only go as high as that radius of your sphere is. See, now they're being killed off. Alright, so all I did was I animated the position of the sphere. So all you have to do is just animate your sphere like that. And there's your smoke. Alright guys, so thanks for watching this tutorial.